All right. Hello, everyone. We're about to start our webinar. Welcome to the panelists. Welcome to all our attendees. We are also live on Facebook. We'll start in just a little bit once giving everyone time to come on in. Welcome, everyone. We'll get started in just 1 second. We're just waiting just a little bit for folks to come on in. There's still folks coming in. Empezaremos en un momentito. Estamos esperando a que todos se unan al seminario. Okay. All right. Welcome, everyone. Again, we're live streaming on Facebook. If folks would want to share that. Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Rigo Valdez, and I'm president of the United Latinos. And before we start this webinar, it is my great pleasure to give our interpreter, Alejandra Marroquin, the floor so that she can break down Zoom interpretation.
Hi, Rigo. Thank you. Hi, everyone. It's a great pleasure to be here. And like Rigo said, my name is Alejandra Marroquin, and I will be one of your interpreters today. And here joining me today as our co-interpreter is Alexia.
Hola, hola a todos. Es un placer, como dijo Rigo. Mi nombre es Alejandra Marroquín y aquí para co-interpretar conmigo hoy está Alexia.
And so we would like to introduce the basic idea of what language justice is. And language justice is the right that everyone has to speak, to hear, and to be understood in the language that they feel most comfortable in.
Entonces queremos empezar presentando la idea de la justicia del lenguaje, que es el derecho básico que todos tenemos de comunicarnos, entender y ser entendidos en nuestros idiomas.
Today's meeting will be in simultaneous. Currently, what we're doing is consecutive interpretation, but shortly we will be moving into simultaneous interpretation.
La reunión de hoy va a ser interpretada simultáneamente. Hasta ahora hemos estado haciendo interpretación consecutiva, pero el resto de la reunión será simultánea.
We also want to remind people that the creation of a bilingual space is a shared responsibility of everyone. So whenever you see us doing a certain gesture, this is slow, this is to speak up, we ask you that you help us create that bilingual space as well.
Entonces, también un recordatorio para todas las personas que la creación de los espacios bilingües y multilingües es una responsabilidad colectiva, por lo que nos pueden ayudar si nos ven haciendo esto. Significa que hablen más despacio y esto es que hablen un poco más fuerte.
Also, if at any moment you are having any technological issues or you cannot access the interpretation feature, please direct yourselves to Clarita, who will be your tech support today.
Y si en algún momento llegan a tener problemas relacionados a la tecnología o cualquier cosa que no puedan escuchar bien o que tengan algún problema, por favor diríjanse con Clarita y de muy buena manera los podrá ayudar.
If you are not bilingual and you do need the Zoom interpretation feature, it will be appearing at the bottom right-hand screen, in front of your screen. Once it's been turned on, please select the language of your choice. The two options that we are offering today are English and Spanish.
Y si usted no es completamente bilingüe, no se siente cómodo en los dos idiomas que manejaremos hoy, que son inglés y español, en la parte de abajo de su pantalla va a haber un icono en forma de globito y ahí puede seleccionar ya sea el idioma inglés o español.
And also for our bilingual folks, you may have already heard it, but we are using gender neutral language that is intentional, as this is our effort to break through gender binaries.
Y para las personas escuchándonos en español se habrán dado cuenta que estamos usando el lenguaje inclusivo con la terminación E. Esto no es un error en pronunciación, pero es algo súper consciente, un esfuerzo consciente que estamos haciendo para retar el binario de género.
Thank you. And with that, I'll turn it over back to Rigo and we can turn on the interpretation feature now.
Muchas gracias y ya con eso se la pasamos a Rigo para que pueda aprender la función de interpretación.
Thank you very much. I'm actually going to pass the host duties to Clarita, who will be able to do that. For some reason, my computer does not want to do that. Okay. It looks like interpretation is available. Please click on the icon that says interpretation. It is a globe. And then choose English or Spanish. Por favor, ya empezamos interpretación. Busque el icono que es el globito abajo que dice interpretación y escoja inglés o español. Thank you, Ale, and thank you, Alexia. So hello again, and welcome to our fourth installment of the United Latinos Latino Voices. So far in this webinar series, we've heard from United Latinos UFCW leaders during the COVID-19. We have engaged in the state of Latinos from media, political, socioeconomic perspective. And most recently, Esther Lopez, our former Secretary Treasurer, reminded us of the power we have as union leaders to create systemic change in our union and beyond. Building from these conversations and concepts, today's webinar, Intersectional Organizing, we're going to hear from four incredible leaders paving the way for the future, for a better future. I hope this conversation today helps us reflect on how we can do better by our members, by our communities, and by our union. This installment of Latino Voices is special, not only because we have an amazing lineup, but because today is the start of Latinx Heritage Month, a month dedicated to acknowledging the contributions and hard work of Latinos in the United States. Acknowledging our community's contributions is a start, but we need to continue pushing for transformative change. So in the spirit of interconnected struggle, this month, let's celebrate our diversity. Let's celebrate our fearlessness. Let's celebrate our lucha, while also honoring the leaders that came before us, that remind us that our cultura is essential, our input is essential, and that this month and every month, Latino workers are essential. For our voices to resonate and make an impact, to commit ourselves to intersectional organizing, today we're hearing from leaders who are an embodiment of this commitment and go beyond their duties to do right by our gente. It is my pleasure to introduce our moderator, Pablo Godoy, who serves the United Latinos Board as Executive Vice President. Pablo joined the UFCW as a rank and file member at a grocery store at age 14. A true trailblazer at 22, he began working as a staff member for the national office in Canada. And by 2018, he became the UFCW Director of Western Canada. Pablo has increased visibility of the United Latinos in Canada and has made our organization grow exponentially these past couple of years. It is my pleasure and honor to introduce you, my comrade in the movement, and my friend, Pablo Godoy.
Thank you so much, Rigo, for that introduction, and more than anything, thanks for all the work that you do in ensuring that the United Latinos continues to operate with an intersectional lens as the guiding principle that guides a lot of our work. To that end, it's a privilege and an honor to be able to be a part of today's discussion, to be a part of a group of people that will be sharing the amazing, incredible work that they do on a day-to-day basis that really speaks to the reality of operating within a framework that really is intersectional. I think within the labor movement, for quite some time now, we've thought about this concept, and it's often used, but not necessarily practiced in the way that a lot of us would like to see it practiced. That is to say that intersectionality and a framework of intersectionality goes much beyond simple representation or a visual representation of inclusivity or diversity. It goes to an actual praxis through which all means and all elements of work take on the vision of what intersectionality really means. Rather than myself try to give you what that looks like, we have an amazing panel today that's going to speak to some of the work that they're doing to ensure that, racial justice, gender equity, immigration rights, and the battle for all, how they're so intertwined and interconnected, and how we in the labor movement need to A, learn, B, share, but C, integrate a little bit better and beyond what we've been doing in the past to ensure that all of our movements are truly intersectional. And so to that end, I'm extremely privileged to be able to introduce to you our first panelist, Bambi Salcedo. Bambi is a national and international transgender Latina woman who received her master's degree in Latinx studies from Cal State, Los Angeles. Bambi is the president and CEO of the Trans Latina Coalition, a national organization that focuses on addressing the issues of transgender Latinos in the US. Bambi developed the Center for Violence Prevention and Transgender Wellness, a multi-purpose, multi-service space for trans people in Los Angeles. Bambi's remarkable and wide-ranging activist work has brought voice and visibility not only to the trans community, but also to the multiple overlapping community issues that her life has touched, including migration, HIV, youth, LGBT, incarceration, and Latinx communities. Through her instinctive leadership, she has birthed several organizations that created community where there was none, an advocate for the rights, dignity, and humanity for those who have been without a voice. Bambi, thank you so much for joining us today.
Bueno, primero que nada, a mí me gusta darle gracias a mi poder superior por darme la oportunidad de estar aquí con ustedes. Blessings to everyone, and I hope that you're all doing well and that you're taking care of yourselves and your loved ones in these uncertain times. Thank you also for sharing this moment, this space with all of us. And I also want to honor and express my gratitude to Rigo and Pablo and everyone at UFCW who really thought to invite me and to participating in this session. So once again, my name is Bambi Salcedo, and I do have the privilege to be the president and the CEO of the Trans Latina Coalition. The work that we do and how it fits into this theme of intersectional organizing, it really is just that. One of the things that is core to the work that we do is that the work that we do is actually informed by the very people who we work for and who we work with. We, as Pablo mentioned, we have created a center in Los Angeles. So we are a national advocacy organization that has representation in 10 different states and cities across the United States, but we are based in Los Angeles. And in Los Angeles, because of, as we were trying to organize people across the United States, trans people, we were seeing that many people who wanted to be involved and who wanted to contribute to the changes that need to happen didn't have access to basic things that people oftentimes take for granted, like housing, even food, and obviously access to healthcare services and other things. And our national board came together in 2015 and decided that in order for us to address that significant issue in our community, that we also needed to move into doing direct service provision. Because initially when we started as an organization, we thought that if we influence into changing the structures that continue to marginalize our community and oppress our community, and particularly trans people who are immigrant and live in this country, then we thought that if we change those structures that, we can change the quality of life of our community. But unfortunately, again, people didn't have access to basic things. And so that's how the Center for Violence Prevention started. And we got our first grant in January 2016. And we have built a multi-purpose and multi-service space to support our community. We have a dropping space where people can come to and be safe. We give lunch every day. We have reentry services supporting trans people who get released from jail, prison, and immigration detention. We have an anti-violence project supporting trans people who have been victims of violence. We also do workforce development. So we provide individuals with an opportunity to learn skills, but also be connected with employment. And through this program, I am so incredibly humble and happy that we get to partner with UFCW Local 770 to provide apprenticeship opportunities to trans people. These apprenticeship opportunities are paid internship that are supported through our organization, and with the hope that, again, we connect people into employment and really thinking about long-term sustainability in our community. And we also have a transitional housing program. We have legal services specifically supporting trans people with their immigration cases. And we also do policy, which is, again, how we initially started. And, I'm very happy that right now, as I am sharing with all of you, I am at the California State Capitol. One of our bills, which is a historic bill that is at the governor's desk right now, which is Assembly Bill 2218, which is the Transgender Health and Equity Fund. And this law, when the governor signs it, will create a fund specifically to support for us to build a healthy trans people in the state of California. And so this is historic because we learned that in the state of California, no piece of legislation has been organized, crafted, mobilized, and pushed all the way from beginning to end to the governor's desk. And we certainly are making history along with other partners. Obviously, UFCW Local 770 was one of the amazing partners who provided us with letters of support. And so, again, the work that we do it's multidimensional, right? We believe that the work that has to be done in order for us to change the landscape and the livelihood and the quality of life of our community, transgender and conforming people, it has to be not just from the bottom up, but also from the top down. And even if it has to be sideways, we have to do that, right? Because the work doesn't come in just one way. We have to be able to approach the work in a multidimensional way. And what is important also is to include the very people who is affected in crafting policies and crafting programs, designing things that we think oftentimes that supports people, but all of those things need to come from people, right? The designing of the programs or whatever it is that they were trying to implement has to come from the most impacted. And we also are pushing for another piece of legislation that we also have supported with is Senate Bill 132, which will support trans people who are incarcerated in the state of California to have the agency and the autonomy to choose where they will be housed when they do their sentences. So this is a piece of, obviously, a reform, right? A prison reform. Obviously, we want the liberation of our people and we want to abolish prisons. But the reality is that that is not happening anytime soon. And there are many trans people who are incarcerated who are also doing life sentences or not getting out anytime soon. And so we also need to think about those individuals. And so, you know, we also do like immigration work. We have rapid response teams, both in New Mexico and in Aurora, California. And, you know, we support people who are both inside the immigration detention and also getting out of immigration detention. And so, again, our work is multi-dimensional, and that's how we do the work that we do. And I'm looking forward to questions that Pablo may have. Thank you so much for the opportunity.
Thank you so much for an insight into the very powerful and moving work that you're doing, Bambi. Really, out of a lot of the very important work and everything you said, really what was woven throughout was that concept of multidimensional work, and that all your work is informed by the very voices that the work is meant to support and help. And I think that's so crucial when we talk about any real conversation on real intersectional work and real work that's transformative, right? And so really thank you so much for all the work that you do, for always being such a trailblazer, and for being an accomplice in our collective struggle with the United Latinos. Thank you so much. Now it's my honor as well to introduce to you all our second panelist, Alfreda Daniels. Alfreda Daniels is a community organizer with the Minneapolis Regional Labor Federation. She was born in Liberia, lived in a Ghanaian refugee camp, and later migrated to the US as a refugee. Alfreda attended St. Cloud State University, where she studied political science, international relations, and human relations. She mostly organizes in the Northwest area suburbs of the Twin Cities, where she engages community and union members around issues ranging from employment, immigration, and education to transportation. In doing so, she helps create a non-transactional relationship between communities of color and the labor movement, where they are collectively working to build power for change. Alfreda is one of the co-founders of the Black Immigrant Collective, an organization focused on elevating the voices of Black immigrants in Minnesota. In early 2015, she organized the Northwest Suburbs Community and Labor Collective, whose mission is to build an intentional multi-sector partnership that will take on working family issues, develop leaders, and build political power in Northwest area suburbs as the labor movement expands. Alfreda, thank you so much for joining us today, and we look forward to hearing about your work.
Thank you. Thank you. It's such an honor to be in the midst of wonderful people tonight. Well, you've said it all. Like, the work we do out here, or the work that I do out here, is so important, because as a labor movement, one thing that we solely focus on is our ability to negotiate contracts for our workers. My job is to inform us that workers are not just a singular piece. Like, we're not just about working in a paycheck. There's so many issues that are attached to us. For me, as a refugee coming here, I'm not just a worker. I'm a refugee. I'm Black. I'm an immigrant, and so many other workers have issues. We have workers who are educators, but they're also parents. We also have a lot of these different issues that actually impact us that we must address if we actually care about workers, whether it's healthcare, whether it's anything. So when I got hired in 2015 with the Minneapolis Regional Labor Federation to build relationship within the community, I realized that the community are us. There are our members who live in the community, right? Our members send their kids to the same school that our members teach as well. So we are all one. So then I went back to the drawing board and said, this is not about organizing community and having community and labor, having this relationship. It's actually looking at the worker as a whole, and for us to deal with issues that impact us across the board. So we started doing work a little bit differently, right? One, that helped us build a stronger relationship within a community and within a stronger presence, because we weren't just talking about bargaining a new contract. We weren't just talking about organizing workers into unions. We were talking about immigration. We were talking about LGBTQ+ issues. We were talking about healthcare We were talking about issues that actually impact our everyday workers. And through that, we had workers started being very involved within the process. Because most workers, when we invite them and say, hey, come to a union meeting, they hesitate because it's almost kind of like they know what's happening already. But if you go into their community and say, hey, I am here to ask you what is going on in your community, what do you care about? Because we as as organized labor care about you, and we want to know what is impacting you within your community, people start to show up. So because of that, we created this table, the Northwest Suburbs Community and Labor Coalition, which is a model that was actually adopted in different areas of Minnesota, and the Nationals as well, and other union and other organized labor across the US started doing the same work. We created this table, and we had our community members and our union members within each community coming together and to discuss local issues that actually impact them. And this set the ground for our unions when they're coming to the community to actually organize. Most times I get calls, it's like, oh, I went to the store to organize around, to organize healthcare workers. And people are like, oh, I don't know anything about SEIU, but I know for sure, I don't know about the healthcare worker union, but I know for sure I saw the logo SEIU when we were pushing for DED or TPS. I saw them there. So they become part of the community. And I think looking at workers as a whole is something that we need to push when it comes to organized labor. We need to continue to push that, because that is how we actually create relationship with our workers, and it's beyond them just paying their dues. It's actually us within the community and letting them know that we care about the things that impact you on the daily basis, and we're incorporating that into our organization to make sure that you're safe. So I'll take any other question later, and yeah, thank you.
Thanks so much for your insight, Alfreda. That work is tremendous. And I also really got struck even after reading your bio, just the term non-transactional, and how strong and how powerful that really is. And it goes beyond this idea that being a part of community or trying to help out is cutting a check or giving a donation or some type of prize or something that you donate, rather than really building something that's meaningful, something that actually is a partnership, something that actually involves people coming together to build. And I think that is so pure and so meaningful and so necessary when it comes to any type of community building. The other thing that really stands out is this idea of the worker as a whole, right? I think if we think about intersectionality in any way, shape, or form, as a union, we can't simply look at a person and think that their only identity is a worker. Right? Their identities have to do with everything else they may identify as. And for us to truly care, as you said, about them, really means looking at all the pieces of that identity and really caring and taking a part in whatever help is needed in all aspects of life. And I think one thing that sometimes that we forget is that, as you said so eloquently, workers aren't separate from our communities. They live in our communities. They are our communities. And so thank you for those comments and for the work that you do. I'm sure we'll have plenty of questions afterwards. Next, it's my honor to introduce to everybody Robert Chlala. He is a program manager for Neighborhood Funders Group, Funders for a Just Economy, and completing his PhD in sociology at the University of Southern California. In fact, I believe as of today, it's official that he successfully defended his dissertation and is now Dr. Robert Chlala. So congratulations. FGE works to mobilize philanthropic resources and shift the power relations to support worker power building with an intersectional and place-based focus. Prior, he spent 6 amazing years working with the United Food and Commercial Workers, Local 770, and community partners on cannabis workers' rights, social equity, and community reinvestment. He came into labor from his own experience in service work and as an Arab immigrant fleeing political violence, and from organizing in youth organizing spaces in California that reimagines our relationship with each other around the world. Robert, thank you so much for joining us. Congratulations once again.
Thank you so much. It's an amazing feeling to be here right after defending, because this is really why I did this work and what mattered to me. And really learning from the United Food and Commercial Workers, learning with the UFCW Local 770. I feel it's a privilege to be able to sit here and speak and share these stories when many folks are still languishing in jails from the war on drugs, from the cannabis criminalization, as well as many folks who are out there working right now and putting their lives on the line to provide people essential medicine. And that kind of real powerful work that's happening in the cannabis industry and the link to labor in an intersectional lens is what brought me to work with the UFCW. I actually met a UFCW worker very early in the campaign at a dispensary in Los Angeles. And at the time I was bouncing between service work and underpaid nonprofit work while dealing with the effects of still being unable to pass E-Verify. And at that moment, there was a campaign going on around Proposition D, which was a proposition in Los Angeles to basically save the cannabis industry from the premise that this was providing essential medicine, even at that time in 2012, for many people in the community. And it was being spearheaded by a labor union. And the woman who helped me, we'll call her M, we grouped to develop a wonderful friendship. She, handed me a flyer and talked about just how critical it was not only to pass this to protect the industry, but to protect workers. And as somebody who had been doing criminal justice organizing with young people and who had seen and been affected by both immigrant and juvenile justice criminalization, to see the labor union stepping into a space that many folks weren't even talking about in mainstream media, many community organizations were afraid to touch, really poked my interest and made me wonder what's going on the ground at UFCW that's making this happen. Em and I developed a friendship, and ultimately I chose to spend many, many years working on this campaign and trying to find ways to support through research and on the ground coalition building with those same community organizations. And I remember one time we were sitting after a long day of trying to visit shops early in a campaign moment, and Em was tired and I was tired, and she was telling me, the most frustrating thing to me is that many people believe this doesn't matter. But what do you can you tell that to the guy who comes in with cancer, or the people with HIV/AIDS who come into our shop for free medicine, or the folks who normally can't leave their house but come out for that one moment for this life-saving medicine that they can't get because they don't have health insurance and have no other way? Tell them that, and tell me why a union chose to believe that we do matter. And for me, that's kind of the crux of that intersectional labor work within UFCW. It's the same work that motivated her to also fight to challenge sexual harassment at the shop, which is a practice that's rampant in the cannabis industry. That, later she would tell me that queer and transgender women come to cannabis because they can't often find other opportunities they're shut out of. And she'd be damned if this was going to become an industry that was marked by sexual harassment. And the union gave her the vehicle to move beyond those tight relationships and to actually build and protect each other through mechanisms like mediation and through building a contract campaign, and extending beyond that to educate other workers and to build an intersectional social equity campaign. And at the core of, for me, why I continue to really believe in the power of labor to build an intersectional model is that when you center workers' voices and experiences, when you understand that essential work isn't just a nice word, but it's about literally the ways in which workers connect community and help us attain things like medicine, but also food and every other thing that really drives our lives in the economy, then you can completely reverse the way you do organizing and make it about building relationships and building community. There's much more I can share about the kind of things we did from that premise and the campaign continue to do, such as expungement clinics, such as the things that don't often have an immediate value when it comes to calculating a contract campaign or membership numbers, but still matter for restorative and reparative justice. But I think that that's really, it begins with relationship. It begins with relationships among workers and each other that were built through the campaign, relationships with patients that were built through the campaign, and relationships with a broader community who was still suffering from the effects of the war on drugs due to disinvestment, due to continued criminalization and exclusion, and due to the general traumas that were experienced by this violence. So I'm really excited to share more and really feel honored to be able to sit on this panel with so many people who are on the ground throughout the country building the model that I think will take us into a better future.
Thanks once again, Robert, for sharing that. Congratulations again on the work and your accomplishment today. I think it's really key what you said in terms of relationship building, right? What kind of relationship is it that we're trying to build with people that we're organizing? If there are true relationships, looking at the other multi-sectional, intersectional issues that people deal with is very important. And I really, really love the fact that you mentioned, the concept of centering our work around workers' voices, and how important that is. And living in today's pandemic, that couldn't be any truer than it is today, right? And that workers are suffering at the helm of a pandemic, and often their voices and lived experiences are being ignored when it comes to how corporations and companies and the likes are coming forward to supposedly create protections for them. So I really took that away. Thank you so much again, Robert, for having us, and welcome back, I guess, really, if you spent so many years with UFCW 770. Next, I have the privilege of introducing Zenon Jaimes Perez. He is the Advocacy and Communications Director with the Texas Civil Rights Project. A native Austinite, Zenon became heavily involved in social justice movements through his personal experience growing up in a mixed-status immigrant family and seeing firsthand the effects of the private prison system. Previously, he worked on advocacy, policy, and communications with the United We Dream, the largest immigrant youth-run organization in the country, the Center for American Progress, and Advocates for Youth. Always passionate about demystifying policies and laws for his community, Zenon is a first-generation college graduate from Georgetown University, where he received a Bachelor's of Science in Foreign Service in 2013. Zenon, thank you so much for joining us.
Hi, thank you, Pablo, and thank you, Robert. Congratulations, Alfreda, Bambi, Rigo, Clara, everybody who made today happen. I'm very excited to be here and really honored. When I got the invitation, I was like, well, I'm not a labor leader, but I'm more than happy to talk about the experiences I had. But when we had a conversation initially to prepare, Rigo and folks were pointing out to me how actually, even though I don't come directly from labor organizing work, so much of the work that I've been able to do and been on the ground for has actually come and been possible because of the work of labor leaders across the country being really the first ones to step out and really make the case for immigrant justice, for LGBT workers, for voting rights, a lot of the issues that are very much central to the work that I do and that we're facing here in Texas. So I'm really excited to be here and to really hear from everyone's work. I think I've already learned a lot of things just from hearing everyone's bios and the work. So as Pablo mentioned, so I work at a group called the Texas Civil Rights Project, and I am currently based in the Rio Grande Valley, El Valle del Rio Grande, which is, if you're not familiar, at the very, very tip southeast between Texas, in Texas, and it borders the Mexican states of Tamaulipas and Nuevo León. And so my organization where I currently work was founded in that area, which in many ways has been a microcosm of the way that this country, the society, and like our global understanding of borders really comes together, right? So I remember a couple of weeks ago when Hurricane Hannah was coming, right? This is a community where I live in when there's 1.5 million people just on the United States side. And then if you include people in Mexico and Matamoros and Reynosa and Piedras Negras, well over 2 million people. And so when the hurricane was coming, right, and all of the projection models put it landing right on top of us, there was a news reporter who said, thankfully, it's not reaching any big cities. Right. And there was a huge outcry because it was like, what do you mean? This is a community of 2 million people. And even though it might not be Houston, it might not be New York, it might not be Miami, the message was clear, right? What we had been hearing for decades, centuries, is that for a lot of people, the lives of border communities don't matter. And that's really a problem for us because actually we've been fighting this same crap for years since we were founded 30 years ago. But really, a lot of the work that we've done has gotten a lot of attention because of the Trump administration. But I'm here to say that's not new, right? And the legacy of this work comes before me, will come after me, and will be led by new generations of folks that are going to be on the ground fighting, especially from border communities. And so what we focus on down here is facing basically the worst aspects of the Trump administration's immigration policies and pushback for the last 4 years. So everything that we see from the news that we saw today about ICE abuses and medical abuses against women in detention, what we see, the teardown of asylum, the mistreatment of trans and queer individuals in detention, the building of the border wall, the gutting of asylum, the sending back people to their deaths. All of that are things that we're going to be seeing first here at the border. And so really the last couple of years for us has been really responding to this, right? The international right to seek safety is basically no longer existing in this country. Because of coronavirus, because of the attacks for the last several years, it's basically impossible now for anyone to come and seek asylum, even though we know that since World War II, this is the highest number of international migrants and asylum seekers we've had globally since the catastrophe of World War II led to millions and millions and millions of refugees and asylum seekers. We're facing the same numbers now because of violence that our foreign policy has created, because of climate change that is driving people to the borders, and because of political instability and the inequalities of the global system and economic global system, right? All of these things are coming together in our unique region in the Rio Grande Valley in South Texas, which has the most number of migration crossings, the most number of asylum seekers, the most border wall built since the last 4 years, and the most number of people who have been turned away just for seeking safety. And so for the last 4 years, we've responded to this through litigation, through organizing, and through telling the stories, right? Because we know, and I was organizing and doing this work during the Obama years, and it was such a difficult time to really get folks to know and understand what was happening. And the Trump administration has sort of made it easy for us to be the boogeyman, right? But if we do see a political change in the next coming months and a transition away from the Trump administration, the crap that we've been facing isn't going to go away magically. If anything, it's going to be more important for us to stay activated and to stay motivated and do things like what my team did a couple weeks ago, where we exposed a hotel site here in the Valley in a Hampton Inn, where we basically threw just our ears to the ground, found out that there was families, children, folks from the Congo, from Haiti, from El Salvador, from Guatemala, who were being secretly and illegally held in a hotel room here in the Valley. And we basically had to infiltrate the hotel and expose what was happening. And it led to a moment where everyone is freaking out about this, right? And we push and we make a little bit of headway, but it's still not transforming the system. And so these little fights and these little battles that we have are very important. And sometimes it feels like we're losing, right? But in the longer arc of where we're going and really making the case against what is the idea of why do we have DHS? Why is this imaginary fictional line on the border dividing us? Who is most affected, right? Like, it's no longer necessarily just Mexicans, but really a lot of Black migrants that are coming, trans and queer migrants that are coming, folks that are not going to be part of the normal immigration fight, right, are coming. And so really thinking through that. And part of the fight here is that we're going to need to work across movements, across organizations, and across communities if we're really wanting to win, because this is a broader arc of the criminalization that migrants face, the dehumanization that migrants and border communities face, and the hyper-militarization of borders and law enforcement that we're facing. And so I'm really excited to be here, share a little bit about my work, and really think really deeply with the folks here on this panel about how we can build cross-movement work together and cross-regional work together.
Thank you so much, Zenon, for those comments. And you're absolutely correct and touched right on the theme of what our question period really will get into. And that is, how is it that we ensure that we are working across movements, and how is it that we can be as purposeful in our partnerships that we build so that we combat these fights that we're all facing? Because let's face it, the fights and battles and pressures are coming in every single direction for our communities. And unless we have a real partnership, a real intersectional approach to combating these attacks, it becomes very difficult for each group in and of itself to fight for these attacks. Yet when we combine our voices, you know, we are definitely stronger together. And so with that in mind, I wanted to take a second to ask our first panel question. And really it takes us a step back to really look at and dig a big bit deeper into the concept of intersectionality and what it truly means. And so the question itself is, what does intersectional organizing mean to you? And how have you and or your organization organized under an intersectional framework? And I'd like to open it up to all panelists, hopefully to chime in on that question. So again, what does intersectional organizing mean to you? And how have you and or your organization organized under an intersectional framework?
I guess since nobody's starting, I guess I can start. So, you know, like, I mean, all of the amazing and beautiful people who share, right? Like talk about like the different things, or, you know, also known as intersections, right? That that people really face, right? You know, Alfreda shared like her experience, which is similar to my experience, right? Like I am a trans, Latina, mujer, or woman, immigrant, and undocumentada or undocumented, right? So like I'm an ex-convict, I'm a, you know, a recovery. I mean, you know what I mean? Like all of these things, right? Like are the things that make me and also impact me, right? And so I think it's important that we recognize that, right? And it has just been as of lately when this term of intersectionality was coined. And so it is important that we don't just use these terms, right? But that we actually understand them and do, right? What needs to be done in order to support the most marginalized. You know, the sole reason why we exist, it's because when we started in 2009, although there were two prominent trans-led national organizations, those organizations were not including the needs and issues of trans, Latina, immigrant women who were living in this country. And that was my intersectionality, right? Like that was part of my intersection. And because I had the ability and the privilege to have a job at that time, right? And because I was already in the organizing movement, then I felt that it was also my responsibility to respond to some of the needs of my own community who were the less fortunate. And so we have been very intentional, you know, and I also want to say, you know, that we as an organization obviously value collaborations, right? Because the work that we do and that we have done could not be possible if it's not through collaboration, not just of individuals, but also amazing and beautiful organizations, right? That have supported the work that we do, that we've done, and that we will continue to do. It is through those collaborations that, you know, that we have been able to build that center that is now funded, right? But there's also more work that needs to be done, and specifically when it comes to the trans community, right? We know that in 2020, the trans community were, in comparison to the gay and lesbian community, we are about 40 years behind, right? Legislatively, academically, economically, right? And then we experienced this global pandemic, right? And so we know for a fact that the trans community is going to be set even further behind than how we were. And so I guess the question is for all of us, right? Like, what are we going to do, in order for us to ensure that all of those people who have been impacted, that we don't let anyone behind, right? Because, we use liberation very loosely, but we don't necessarily mean it, right? And so in order for us to obtain the liberation that we claim and that we say that we want, then it has to be not just intersectional, but it also has to be intergenerational and multidimensional. And so yeah, I'm just gonna leave it at that for now.
If no one wants to go next, I think I'll go next, because it's sort of when I was thinking through this question, right? And I think a lot of the learnings that we've been having in our work down here in South Texas, to me, a lot of the principles and the ideas of how we approach this intersectional organizing question, to me, is centered on three things, right? And really, it's about the humility of like knowing what you don't know, having the humility to be able to know and understand that and identify that in yourself or in the work that you do, right? Like, what are my gaps in knowledge and information and work? The humility to ask for help and the humility to give help. And really the reasons for that is because it's not to help someone because of charity or something like that, right? But really it is because of what Bambi said. It's because this humility to ask for help, to give help, and to know what you don't know is really tied in with the idea of that the collective liberation of every community is really tied together, right? So I'm not free unless my other communities are free as well. And so that has to be the central question that we're talking about. And one example I'll give in terms of like just directly the work that we just faced, right? I talked a little bit about South Texas and our work here in the Valley. Almost all of our staff down here, right, have an experience of either being Mexican-American, Chicano, immigrants themselves, documented with who are nevertheless either almost all Mexican. What we're facing now, though, is that most of the communities that are coming are actually from Haiti, El Salvador, the Congo, a lot of places where, yes, it might be fair for me to say like, yeah, I grew up with this. Yeah, I understand what immigrant communities are, but it's not true, right? I can't sit here and say, I know what really the Haitian community is gonna face, right? And so whenever we did the hotel infiltration and like really got the information and clients who were in that hotel, and we were able to really quickly stop their expulsion and get them out, we actually found that 90% of the people in that hotel were Haitian and spoke Haitian Creole. Now it takes a lot for us to say like, okay, clearly we don't know what to do here, right? Like this is not something, we have not spent our time and work really working with Haitian communities. And so the ability for us to ask for help, and we reached out to the Haitian Bridge Alliance, Corleen, who folks who know her, she's amazing. We literally had the humility to be able to reach out and say, Corleen, like, hey, this is something that we're going to need to build with you, right? And really think through how can we, what's the input that we can provide, and what's the input that the Haitian Bridge Alliance can provide, so that we can stop the expulsions of these Haitian migrants and really build together. So that to me was like a clear example of at least the intersectional organizing framework that I operate with, right? Is about humility, giving and asking for help, and really tying it together with the idea of our collective liberation.
Yeah, I think that just to kind of jump. Oh, and then Freda, do you want to go?
That wasn't my hand up, but I can still go.
No, yeah, okay.
So for me, when I hear that term, intersectionality, a lot of things come to mind, because that is a term that can be used and abused sometimes, but it's also a very powerful thing. I work for the labor movement, and we are such a powerful institution that sometimes I don't even think we realize how powerful we are. Most workers actually depend on us for more than what we're given. That is more than bargaining a contract, but we are still stuck in a place where we believe That is the only thing that we should be doing. And then when it comes to intersectionality, whenever we try to do that, we do that without truly understanding what that means. So sometimes it comes up as, let's say this, as a Black woman talking about my issues, and then you have a white woman saying, well, we are the same, we're women, so hey, let's have this intersectionality. And it's like, no, that's not what it is. So I think for me, it's education first for such a big organization for where I work. It's like education first on what does this mean and how can this be powerful? And also, how can this actually shut people down? Because trust me, that term can be misused to shut people down. So like, I'm sorry, Bambi, is that your name? Okay, like Bambi was sharing their experience, right, as a trans person and everything else that connects. Now imagine an organization like organized labor, understanding a worker from that perspective. Trust me, we can negotiate more than just a paycheck. We can negotiate respect for that person on the job site. We can negotiate dignity in the way that they understand what dignity is. We can stand up against systematic racism, understanding that we have Black and brown people within our organizations, but yet they have different lifestyles. So for me, I think it's education. Yes, we can try to intersect, and we can look at workers as one person, but we as an organization, we as leaders, how do we understand the term intersectionality? Because the way we understand it actually is going to help us actually do what we are supposed to do to represent that whole person.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Alfreda. I think that this idea of a whole person is really what drove a lot of success just in the cannabis campaign, which I'm using kind of as a main example today, because for me, it's often not talked about for many reasons. And part of it is because it was so fearless in the way in which it allowed workers to be their whole selves. It didn't ask workers to downplay the fact that they were selling marijuana to people as a medicine. It didn't ask workers to downplay their queerness and their identity and participation in queer community. It gave them spaces for that as part of the UFCW's queer caucuses. It gave them the space to participate in other campaigns that would allow them to express their identity otherwise. But it also really built a campaign around making sure that they could fight for what mattered for them beyond just the paycheck, like Alfredo was saying. That included fighting for social equity. So fighting for the opportunity to not just be workers in these spaces, but to eventually own their own shops. That's an awkward position for a labor union to take, to say, we trust that it's going to be okay to fight for you to be management one day, and to know that when you're management one day, you're going to respect your workers in the right way, and that it matters to build community wealth in both ways. It matters to build community wealth, both from the paycheck and building living wage, high road jobs, but it also matters to let people take ownership of the institutions that have been these community institutions. And the kind of part that really matters to me around intersectionality, and that I saw really defined and learned from about what matters, and I think that we can learn from a lot right now, because there's a lot of debates about where the labor union fits in, for example, around policing and Black Lives Matter, is that intersectionality involves being willing to give up certain things, to give up parts of your own agenda sometimes. And to fight for community reinvestment, the UFCW Local 770 had to put a lot of political relationships at risk. They were able to pass an initial proposition in LA that kind of sailed through, people weren't paying attention. And then the city attorney caught wind, and the city attorney is very much tied to police power in Los Angeles and police unions. And they quickly scaled back what was an opportunity to move the entirety of cannabis funds to a health and equity fund, which right now we're all talking about health and equity. And this was several years before the pandemic. And we had to fight again. And the UFCW worked with community allies and actually let them center their voices. And what happened in that campaign is that many allies who were quick to jump up and jump in that campaign, political allies who were close to the union, started to question, what was happening. But the UFCW, centering the voices of workers, for the fact that these workers really believed that the money that they were building, the wealth that they were building, needed to go back to communities harmed by the war on drugs, continue to fight, wanting to own up to the relationships that had built with community allies over time who had stood up for them. They continued to fight as well. And it was a hard campaign, and it's still an ongoing struggle to get community reinvestment of tax money. But for me, even in failure, there was a victory in terms of building those relationships. Because coming out of that, one of the organizations we worked with, the Youth Justice Coalition, which represents Black and Brown formerly incarcerated youth, understood what the power of a labor union could be as a community asset. And they wanted to continually help with building an apprenticeship program for cannabis. They really have started to think about what are the other ways in which Youth Justice Coalition and UFCW can work together. And that's what matters in intersectionality. It means that at some time, you're willing to center voices that are not your own immediate interests, at the risk of loss, at the risk of failure, because you know the long-term relationships matter, and that's really where the winning is. And that's how you build a movement.
Those are all very powerful responses. I think it leads really well into our next questions, because really when we talk about intersectionality, I really appreciate what Alfreda said in terms of, you know, we have to be careful that it's not used and it's used but not abused, that it doesn't contribute to the erasure of people's identity, because the people that use it may be using it in a way that's comfortable to them rather than real, purposeful, and transformative, which is ultimately what the goal should be. And so to that end, the second question, and as I ask the second question, I would encourage our attendees or participants, if you do have any questions to ask the panelists, as soon as this round of question is concluded, we'll be taking questions from the participants. So the second question is, what are strategies that bring our struggles together? Moving forward, how can we organically implement them into our organizing? So once again, the question is, what are strategies that bring our struggles together? And moving forward, how can we organically implement them into our organizing?
There's probably a better, more thought out response, but I would say that like strategy and work together comes also from like building relationships. So I will say like sometimes instead of forcing the strategy, sometimes the conversation is like, who am I not building relationships with? Who am I currently building relationships with? Like have that self-criticism and that self-analysis to say like, oh, if I'm only really building with people who are like me or I'm comfortable with, like, that's probably the problem, right? So like, I think a strategy it's not really a strategy, but it is like a question of like, who are you in relation with? And like, have you done that self-reflection as well?
If I can add, I think part of the strategy that needs to happen in order for all of us collectively really create meaningful change in the structures that have marginalized our communities for centuries is the strategy of building people power, right? And building people power in a way that at this very moment, if we understand, right, that what we're experiencing right now, right, that there's no time for us to be complacent any longer. You know, the labor movement specifically has history into, you know, creating those changes, right? And I think it goes along with what I was saying earlier, right? That we cannot leave other communities behind, right? And I'm speaking specifically about, you know, trans communities because of where we are situated within our society, and in terms of population, in terms of, you know, power, right? In terms of, you know, the structures that we have to, as a community, continue to fight, right? That I think those same structures have been all of us, you know, to compete with one another, right? there's this, saying that I'm sure people have heard of, like crabs in the bucket, right? And that often happens specifically in groups, who are doing movement work, right? That some of those groups get to advance, a little more, and some other groups are not. One, because they don't have the infrastructure that need to have. And I do have to admit, right, that we as an organization um, have been one of those organizations that have grown exponentially in just 4 years, right? When we started in 2009 and up until 2015, we were doing volunteer work. All of the people who were part of our organization were leaders in different states and cities who were doing organizing work, and nobody was getting paid. Um, and again, I mentioned that we got our first grant, right? And so there are more and more trans-led groups that are popping up, right? And that's why I mentioned Assembly Bill 2218, right? Because we are thinking of our broader community. We believe that we should bring along all of us, right, to the finish line. Because, it's very easy for us to get distracted, for us to be ¿cómo se dice así? Enflashados, ¿no? Or with like, yeah,
Shiny thing.
yeah, like uh, impacted, right? By money, by status, right? And so Assembly Bill 2218 here in California is the Transgender Health and Equity Fund, which is a piece of legislation that will create a fund that will support trans people for us collectively to build a healthy trans community. So I think it's important that we understand what this meaning is of crabs in the bucket, not continue to go with that, but really understand the leadership development that needs to happen in our communities and the intersectional or intergenerational, leadership development that needs to happen so that we can all move forward into changing those structures that have marginalized our communities for centuries.
Yeah, I think just to add to that, speaking more from my role now, recently starting working with Funders for a Just Economy, we're basically trying to organize foundations to give basically much more of their resources to economic justice group led by affected communities. Foundation money can be super divisive in a way to break intersectionality apart. And I think one of the things that matters is figuring out how and where people do share resources and collaborate together to kind of bring those resources together. And how do we collectively organize through institutions like ours to push back on foundations and organize them as well and treat them like we treat policymakers in the government, not just responding to them, but really treating them as people to be advocated and organized. And understanding where their wealth comes from and really breaking that down as well. The second kind of piece of that is also figuring out on a different level from the labor union piece. I think that people underestimate just how unique and powerful it is to have a democratic worker-led organization and that structure, and making sure to really bring workers face-to-face with community organization members as much as possible, not treating intersectionality, organizing and coalition building as something that happens between the folks who are organizers in one place and the organizers in the other, but making sure folks can actually meet where they're at, learn each other's stories. That was a really powerful part of the cannabis campaign. And it happened in different spaces, in direct service work, like the expungement, where folks met eye to eye and worked together. It doesn't have to just be a sit down, hash it out meeting. It can be in serving together and working together. But creating those opportunities, I think, for face-to-face engagement among members really matters.
And I also wanted to add too to what was said earlier about like relationship. I think that is important in bringing our struggles together and how can we organically, create relationships. I think the first part is one, creating relationships and truly understanding each other. Should I say like non-transactional relationships is very powerful. We actually usually win at the speed of trust. So having that trust and making sure that our interest doesn't come first, like Robert was talking about, before the people, and being willing to let other issues go that are our interests. Because sometimes as organized labor, our interest is a direct conflict with our workers. So how are we building that non-transactional relationship with workers and knowing where they're at and what impacts them? And that when even through our endorsement process, we're understanding that, yes, this person is for, and they're for this issue, or they're definitely going to push to make sure we don't have right to work. However, this is a person who is signing a bill to over police Black and brown communities and like promoting the mass incarceration of our Black and brown people. How do you choose in that point? Because the very worker who you are trying to work on behalf of and negotiate a contract of doesn't feel safe in this situation. So how do we really create that non-transactional relationship in the place where we understand that our interest should surround the interest of the workers?
Again, once again, very, very powerful responses. I think it gives us quite a bit to reflect on. I really do like that concept of, starting the conversation on intersectionality. Really start with where are we at and how do we operate as individuals? Then how do we take up space in the movements or places that we do the work that we do, whether that's organizing or not. And I think we can't look much beyond anywhere else until we begin to deconstruct our own selves and what spaces or what sometimes, how complicit are we in erasing other people's voices? How complicit are we in not necessarily operating in intersectional ways? But at the same time, what power do we possess to make sure that we can create space and we can be part of that transformative change, right? And I think sitting idly by, whether it's in an organizing campaign or whether it's in the work that we do day to day, is not a solution. It's part of the problem. And so hopefully what we take away from today is that introspective view in all of us to say, what could we be doing better? What can we take away and where do we go from here? So thank you so much for the insight on those questions. At this point, I believe we have a few participant questions. I'm seeing...
Pablo, we're going to bring Alessandra Villarreal in really quick so that they can ask their question. Alessandra, you're muted.
Oh, hi. Sorry about that. I was just asking in the Q&A where the organization that Zanen talked about in the Valley, like where that was happening, because I have family from the Valley, so I was just curious.
Yeah, I work at the Texas Civil Rights Project. We're currently in Hidalgo County, right outside of McAllen and Alamo, Texas. So
oh, okay.
You're there?
Yeah.
Yep.
That's awesome. Thank you.
I believe we have a second question from Rina. Rigo, will we bring her on?
Hi. It's good to see you. And thank you guys so much for such great insight on your work. It's been really awesome to hear about all of the amazing work that you all have been doing all over the country. My question is really inspired by my kids, really. Here's one of them. She's very little. But I think about the long game a lot for my children, and I think about where we're going as a country, and it feels very much like on the progressive side, on the left, whoever folks consider themselves to be progressive, we don't play the long game. There's a lot of reasons. It can be anything from funding to grants for our projects and campaigns. Sometimes it just comes down to organizational discipline and being willing to invest in that long term when we really want these quick short-term results. And so if we were to be disciplined and to think about what 10, 15, 20 years to work together, to campaign together, and what that would mean to reach a shared goal with real intersectional organizing, what would you all advocate that shared goal be? And how would you describe what role the UFCW or United Latinos or labor should play in crafting and implementing that for the long term?
If you don't mind, I think I can take that question. I just wanted to say, like, we as labor or organized labor, we do this a lot as far as short-term results. Like, we have a campaign today, we want this result, we want this number, and we go. What that does is we get back into that transactional relationship. That's why we don't sustain a longer term relationship or campaign, because at that point, we do so much and we want the results so fast that we forget that we are working with and for people. And then we use them to get what we see as victory. I think one thing that can actually, because we still have work to do as organized labor, we still have campaigns that we need to, we still have contracts that we need to negotiate. We still have people out on the picket line that we still have to pick up that phone and call people and say, I need this to happen. But what we need to do is slow down and sometimes use our resources and just create relationships with nothing. Pick up the phone, cut a list, reach out to your members, knock the doors and say, I'm just here today. It's not election year. There's nobody on the ballot that I'm asking you to vote for. I'm not asking you to vote for a policy. I'm here today to hear from you. How can we as either UFCW or whatever union that you're part of can be a help to you within your community? What do you care about? What issues do you care about? I'm not here to finish a conversation with, that's why you should vote for this person because they care about that issue. So I think we need to create and be very intentional about those deep relationships, and we need to put our money and our funds there. When that relationship happens, we can still go ahead and mobilize for the short-term victory. But these workers are not just going to feel like they're tools that you call to make sure you have numbers on a picket line. They're going to know that after the picket line, you're still coming to their home, to their neighborhoods, to their community, and you're asking them what they care about, and you're actually incorporating that into your organization, and you're listening to them. So at that point, it's a relationship. A quick example is this. I have some friends that when I call and say, I need your help, they don't ask me what for. They'll show up because I have deep relationships with them. And I have people that I actually have to go and recruit and explain to, because these are people I don't have deep relationships with. If we invest our time in actually creating those deep relationships with our workers, you can call on them at any time and they're actually going to show up because they know you're going to be there for them. I think that's a long-term, if we would have done this like 50 years ago, right now, the labor movement would have been way better than it is right now, right? But most of our workers, like even when I'm on the doors or I'm calling during election circle, people usually say, this is the only time labor calls me, right? Because now who are you all supporting? Who do you want me to vote for? And this hurt as an organizer because I feel like this is a transactional relationship and I have my fancy talking points and I have all of these, things that I can talk back to get them. But I also know that I'm not going to be talking to this worker again. And probably their union may not talk to them again, until the next election session. So I think that is something we should invest in.
If I can just add a little bit to that, because that truly is how we do our work. We, for many years and for a long time, trans women, specifically trans women of color, right, have always been in survival mode, right? And I think for us as an organization and as we as community are coming into our power, right? Although there's a lot of work that needs to happen in that regard, right? But my responsibility as a leader of a national advocacy organization that has influenced really the trans movement, not just in the United States, but internationally. It's important that we think and that we organize it strategically, right? I mentioned, for instance, a bill that it's going to become a law, for instance, right? But we also have a campaign going on to invest in trans lives, right? And what that means is that we want to demystify, right, the stereotypes that have been attached to our community, right? Particularly that we're not supposed to exist, for instance, right? And it is through our visibility that we are able to demonstrate and demystify those things, what people have been told about us is not true, right? And I really, really love what Alfreda said, right? Like of building relationships with individuals, right? Get to know a trans person, get to know a trans woman, right? And you'll see that, you know, we're no different than other people, right? That we're actually very capable. And in fact, you know, we have, you know, gifts that other people don't have. You know, we are regarded in indigenous communities as, you know, sacred people. And I think through the colonization, we lost that. And we want to reclaim that. And we are going to be doing this work in a strategic way, and we are going to elevate the presence of our community within our society. And we want to obviously make sure that we get into a better place within our society. So yeah, invest in trans lives.
Just want to give an opportunity for other panelists in case anybody wanted to chime in.
Yeah, I can. I think it's a really important question. And I think that there's a lot to be gained about shifting the view to the long term. And one of the things I try to think like retroactively about is how other movements have kind of transformed over the last 15 years when that question was raised. And I think about the ways in which, for example, immigrant rights organizing has been transformed, in which other forms of criminal justice organizing, and a lot of youth-led youth organizers in those spaces have kind of come up through the ranks and built their own new institutions, learned how to re-navigate relationships with foundations and challenge and push back. But a lot of those folks don't necessarily see the labor movement as part of or in relationship with their work, even though the labor movement has been there in different ways, including in building voter mobilization campaigns. So the question is, like, right now, I think it's critical for labor movement to think about how do you build a new generation of leaders, first and foremost. And that doesn't mean just hiring young organizers and putting them at the very bottom of it, but actually letting them have a voice throughout the organization and how things are driven and mobilized and moved. They don't necessarily have to be workers with those organizations. They can be young BLM organizers. They can be young queer and trans immigrant rights organizers. They are the folks who need to have a voice at the table because they understand where things are going to be in 15 years because they're living those experiences right now. The more we center those voices, the more that over the long term, we're going to see transformation, so that when they look back, they remember, oh, these are the folks who, as Bambi said, invested in me as a leader, not because they wanted something in that immediate, but because they knew this is how you build a movement over the long term.
Thank you for that, Robert. Thank you to everybody tonight. I think that was a tremendous question, Rena, and very well articulated answers. I think again, more than anything, it leads us to ponder where we go from here and where we are at. I think as a labor movement, we know that we have to do better. I think starting there and being able to understand that isn't a bad thing. I think it shows us that we can improve, and that if we know that, you know, what we don't know, as somebody mentioned today, that's a starting point to look at where and how we need to operate in ways that are a lot more transformative, meaningful, and really will build something that we're trying to do, which goes beyond just a simple contract. The contract, while a very important and integral thing of what what we do as a labor union or as the labor movement is not the only thing that, you know, workers are concerned with. There's so much more. And learning from the experiences of the panelists today, I hope we start to integrate the, you know, the thoughts of how is it that we expand this movement? How is it that we integrate a more intersectional approach and really the battles that everybody's facing in a way that hopefully is more purposeful, more united, and more collaborative in a real, truly meaningful way. To that end, I really want to say thank you so much to Zenon, to Bambi, to Alfreda, to Robert for joining us tonight, for all of the work that you're doing. I think it serves as a great example of the multitude in ways people are doing quite a bit of transformative work right across North America and beyond, really. As somebody who's sitting in Canada, I can say that a lot of things that you have brought up are not unseen or are not too different here in Canada. The reality is, I think, across any borders is that marginalized communities are marginalized communities anywhere and everywhere across the world. And the more we can have that as you know, something that guides us in wanting to work across borders, much like we want to work across movements, is very integral to really being able to accomplish any real meaningful change. And so to that end, I want to say thank you so much to the organizers of tonight, Rigo, Clarita, for all your work on putting this thing together. Thank you so much to everybody who has participated, and we hope we see you on our next webinar. Thank you so much. It was a privilege and honor for me to be the moderator tonight.
Thank you, Pablo. I also want to, on behalf of the United Latinos, thank our panelists. Thank you, Dr. Shlala. You always inspire us. Alfreda, good luck on your election. Thank you so much for taking the time to be with us, even though you're out there pounding the pavement. We wish you luck and hope to call you a city council member very, very soon. Bambi, congratulations on 2218. That is historic legislation, always doing groundbreaking work, and we appreciate sharing space with you. And lastly, Zenon, thank you so much for holding down the front line. You literally hold down the front line. And so if there is anything that we at the United Latinos can do to support your work, we are here. So again, thank you everyone who joined us and who's watching us in the interwebs. Goodbye, everybody. And look at Rena and our future. There is our future right there. Take care, everyone.
Thank you.
And happy Latinx Heritage Month.
Bye-bye, everybody. Gracias.
Hey, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.